The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Robert Kincaid's penthouse apartment. From the 37th floor, the city looked like a perfect miniature world. Robert stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching tiny people rushing to work far below. At 45, he had built a tech company from nothing to something worth billions. His personal fortune topped $200 million. He had the cars, the vacation homes, the private jet access, the expensive watches, all the things he once thought meant success. Yet lately, something felt off. The party seemed emptier, the business victories less sweet. Robert couldn't shake the feeling that he was just collecting things while missing something important about life. That morning, as he scrolled through news on his tablet, a story caught his eye. A business owner in another state had lived among homeless people for a week. The article wasn't particularly well written, but something about it stuck with Robert. He put down his coffee and kept reading. By lunchtime, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He canceled his afternoon meetings and drove around the city, specifically the areas he usually avoided. He parked his luxury car several blocks away and walked through neighborhoods where poverty was not hidden but lived in plain sight. People slept in doorways wrapped in thin blankets. A woman with tired eyes held a cardboard sign at a traffic light. A man talked to himself on a bench, his few belongings in plastic bags. "I drive past these streets every day," Robert thought, "but I've never really seen them." That evening, instead of dining at his usual expensive restaurant, he bought a sandwich from a corner store and sat on a park bench. He watched people hurrying home, others with nowhere to go. For the first time in years, he felt something genuine stir inside him, not pity exactly, but a need to understand. Back home, Robert didn't turn on the TV or check his emails. Instead, he grabbed a notebook and started writing. By midnight, his plan was taking shape. He would step out of his comfortable life. He would disguise himself as someone homeless and live in the poorest parts of the city for 3 weeks. This wasn't about writing a book or getting attention on social media. He told no one except his assistant, who thought he was taking a vacation. He didn't want praise or recognition. What he wanted was to understand, truly understand, what it meant to live without the safety net he'd always taken for granted. "I can donate money all day long," he wrote in his notebook, "but I don't know what it's like to be hungry with no food coming. I don't know what it's like to be ignored by everyone who walks past. I don't know what it's like to have no home." The more he thought about it, the more certain he became. He needed to do this, not as some rich guy's game, but as a way to break down the wall between his world and the world just outside his window. He wanted his help to actually help, not just make him feel better about himself. The next morning, Robert made some calls. He set up automatic payments for his bills. He cleared his schedule. Then he called a makeup artist who worked in theater and swore him to secrecy. "I need to become someone else," he explained, "someone nobody would look at twice." Within 48 hours of making his decision, Robert stood before his bathroom mirror, barely recognizing himself. Tomorrow, he would walk out of his building not as Robert Kincaid, successful businessman, but as Rob, a man down on his luck with nowhere to go. His heart pounded with a mixture of fear and purpose that he hadn't felt since starting his company 20 years ago. He was terrified, but for the first time in years, he also felt alive. The makeup artist arrived at Robert's apartment at 5:30 in the morning. He brought several cases of supplies and a serious expression. This wasn't a Halloween costume. This was something else entirely. "I need to look like I've been on the streets for months," Robert explained. Not dirty in a fake way, but weathered. Real. For 3 hours, they worked on his appearance. The artist applied special makeup that made Robert's skin look rougher, older, with reddish patches from sun exposure. He added fake dirt under the fingernails, not too much, just enough. He trimmed Robert's neatly styled hair into an uneven cut, then used product to make it look unwashed and flattened on one side, as if he'd been sleeping on it wrong. "People don't look at homeless folks directly," the makeup artist explained as he worked. "They look past them. So the disguise doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to create the right impression." While the artist worked, Robert thought about what to bring. He decided on just 3 changes of underwear, 2 t-shirts, 1 extra pair of socks, a thin blanket, a water bottle, a small notebook with a pen, and a basic toothbrush. He would keep $200 hidden in his sock and his emergency phone wrapped in plastic, tucked inside the lining of his jacket. No wallet, no credit cards, no ID except a photocopy folded in his shoe. Next came the clothes. The day before, Robert had visited 3 different thrift stores in areas far from his usual hangouts. He bought clothes that were worn but still functional, jeans with faded knees, a plaid button-up shirt missing one button, a t-shirt that had been washed too many times, and boots with scuffed toes and fraying laces. "These clothes are too clean," the artist pointed out. He took the items and treated them, adding subtle stains and wear marks. Not filthy, just lived in. Most homeless people try to stay clean. They just don't have easy access to laundry. The final touch was a green canvas jacket with a torn pocket. It looked ordinary, forgettable. Robert put it on and stood before the full-length mirror in his bedroom. The man staring back at him wasn't Robert Kincaid anymore. This man had worry lines around his eyes. His posture was slightly hunched, protective. He looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. "What do you think?" the artist asked. "I don't recognize myself," Robert said quietly. "That's the point, isn't it?" the artist replied. Robert practiced walking differently, not the confident stride of a CEO, but the shuffling, head-down movement of someone who didn't want to be noticed. He practiced speaking differently too, his voice a little rougher, his vocabulary simpler. He packed everything into a worn backpack the artist had brought. It wasn't big enough for comfort, just enough to hold the bare essentials. Before leaving, Robert took one last look around his apartment. The contrast between the sleek furniture, the expensive art on the walls, and the man now standing in the entryway was jarring. 3 weeks suddenly seemed like a very long time. At exactly 9:15 a.m., Robert left through the service entrance at the back of his building. The doorman he greeted every day for 5 years looked right through him, his eyes briefly registering a stranger before moving on. The transformation was complete. Robert felt a chill as he realized how quickly he'd become invisible. He walked 20 blocks before hailing a city bus that would take him to the neighborhood where he'd begin his new life. As he climbed aboard, fumbling with change for the fare, the driver barely glanced at him. Robert took a seat near the back and looked out the window. The city was the same, but everything else had changed. He was now seeing it from the other side of the glass, the side most people pretended not to notice. The bus dropped Robert off in a part of the city he'd driven through but never really seen. Old brick buildings lined streets dotted with convenience stores, pawn shops, and fast food places. People moved with purpose, to work, to appointments, to somewhere else. That first day, Robert walked for hours just trying to get his bearings. By afternoon, his feet hurt in the unfamiliar boots. He was hungry but unsure where to eat. The small diner he finally entered wasn't fancy, but the waitress looked at him with such suspicion that he left after only ordering coffee. "Sorry, bathrooms for customers only," she said when he asked, even though he just paid for a drink. By evening, the reality of his situation hit harder. Where would he sleep? The temperature was dropping, and the thin jacket wasn't enough. He found a park and sat on a bench, watching as families packed up picnics and headed home. The park slowly emptied until only a few people remained, all looking as lost as he felt. A police car drove by slowly, the officer inside eyeing the bench-sitters. Robert had never felt afraid of police before. Now, something in his stomach tightened as the car passed. The officer didn't stop, but the message was clear: you don't belong here. That first night, Robert barely slept. The bench was hard, the air cold. Every noise startled him awake: cars passing, distant shouts, the rustling of someone else moving between bushes. By morning, he was exhausted, stiff, and desperately needed a bathroom. "No loitering," said the gas station attendant when Robert tried to wash his face in their restroom. 5 minutes, then you're out. 5 minutes to brush teeth, wash face, try to look presentable. The face in the mirror already looked different: tired eyes, stubble growing in for real now, dirt he couldn't quite wash away. By the second day, hunger became a constant companion. Robert bought a cheap sandwich with his hidden money, eating slowly to make it last. The cash wouldn't stretch far, and he wasn't ready to ask for help yet. A woman pushing a shopping cart full of bags passed by. "New around here?" she asked, noticing him sitting against a wall. Her name was Liz, and she'd been on the streets for 3 years. Factory closed, she explained simply. Then the apartment, then everything else. Liz showed him where to find the soup kitchen. That evening, Robert stood in line with 30 other people, shuffling forward slowly, eyes down. The volunteers meant well, but some spoke too loudly, too slowly, as if everyone there couldn't understand normal speech. The soup was thin but hot. Robert sat at a long table across from an older man with hands that trembled slightly. "First time?" the man asked. His name was Tom, once a construction worker until a back injury and pain pills took everything. "You get used to it. Not in a good way, but you do." That night, Tom showed Robert to a shelter. "Get there early," he advised. "Beds fill up fast." The shelter was an old gymnasium with 60 cots spread too close together. The smell hit Robert first. Unwashed bodies, industrial cleaner, and something else he couldn't name. A bored-looking worker took his name, he gave it as Rob, and pointed him to a cot. "Lights out at 10. Everyone out by 7 a.m., the worker said, already looking past him to the next person. That night, lying on the thin mattress listening to coughing, snoring, and occasional crying, Robert took out his small notebook. He wrote by the dim light coming through the windows. "Nobody looks at me anymore. I've become part of the background like a fire hydrant or trash can. Something to walk around, not see. I've been asked to leave 3 stores today just for standing too long. How do you look for work when nobody will let you stay anywhere? How do you stay clean? How do you keep your dignity?" The third day brought rain, a steady cold downpour that seemed to wash away any remaining comfort. Robert's shoes got soaked, his socks stayed wet, his feet developed painful blisters. He spent hours in the public library, one of the few places that didn't immediately ask him to leave. An older librarian watched him carefully but didn't approach until closing time. "There's a day center 3 blocks down," she said quietly. "They have laundry facilities and showers." It was the first truly helpful information he'd received, offered without judgment. That night, back at the shelter, Robert listened to more stories. A young woman who'd fled an abusive home. A middle-aged man who'd lost his teaching job and then his house after his wife's cancer treatments drained their savings. An elderly veteran who spoke little but shared his extra blanket when he saw Robert shivering. "We're not so different, you and me," the veteran said. "Just got dealt different cards." Robert wrote in his notebook until his hand cramped. He was only 3 days in, with 18 more to go. Already his old life seemed distant, like something he'd watched in a movie rather than actually lived. By the beginning of his second week, Robert had developed a routine. Wake at the shelter, leave by 7 a.m., find a bathroom, walk to the day center for a shower when possible, visit the library, look for odd jobs, and secure a spot at the shelter before it filled up. Each day brought new challenges, but also something he hadn't expected, moments of kindness that shone like gold against the harsh backdrop of street life. On Monday morning, Robert sat on a bench near a small neighborhood park, his stomach growling. He hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch. A woman in her 70s approached, pushing a small cart filled with groceries. She stopped, studying him with warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners. "You look hungry," she said simply. Her name was Gloria, and she lived in a tiny apartment nearby. Before Robert could answer, she pulled out a paper bag from her cart. Inside was a sandwich wrapped in wax paper and an apple. "I always make extra," she said. "Never know who might need it." Robert tried to refuse, but Gloria wouldn't hear of it. "We all need help sometimes," she said, patting his shoulder. "Today it's you. Tomorrow it might be me." As the days passed, Robert discovered that Gloria brought food to the park 3 times a week. She lived on a small pension and food stamps, yet she shared what little she had. "Can't take it with you," she laughed when he asked why she gave so much away. At the soup kitchen, Robert met Louis, who volunteered despite living in his car. Louis had been a bookkeeper before the company downsized. Now he spent his days looking for work and his evenings helping at the kitchen. "Keeps me feeling human," Louis explained as he stirred a huge pot of soup. "When you help others, you remember your own worth." He slipped Robert an extra bread roll with a wink. "Don't tell the boss." One rainy afternoon, Robert huddled in a doorway, trying to stay dry. A young boy of about 8 stopped in front of him, ignoring his mother's attempts to pull him along. "Are you cold?" the boy asked, his eyes serious beneath his dinosaur umbrella. "A little," Robert admitted. Without hesitation, the boy unwound his own scarf, blue with soccer balls printed on it, and held it out. "You can have this. I have another one at home." The mother looked embarrassed, then thoughtful. Instead of pulling her son away, she nodded slightly, giving permission. Robert accepted the scarf with a lump in his throat. "Thank you," he said. "This is very kind." "It's okay," the boy said. "My dad says we should help people when we can." Then they continued down the street, the boy turning once to wave. That night, Robert wore the scarf to the shelter, the bright blue standing out among the muted colors everyone wore. Tom, the construction worker he'd met his first night, noticed it immediately. "Nice scarf," he said. "Where'd you get it?" When Robert explained, Tom nodded thoughtfully. "Kids see us," he said. "Adults look past, but kids still see." The shelter was overcrowded that night. A young woman named Anna couldn't get a bed. She sat on the steps outside, clutching a small backpack, looking terrified. "First night out here?" Robert asked. Anna nodded. She'd lost her waitressing job and couldn't make rent. "I've got nowhere to go," she whispered. Robert gave up his spot in the shelter to her. He spent that night on a bench, wrapped in his thin blanket and the blue scarf, strangely content despite the discomfort. By Thursday, Robert had become a regular at Hope Kitchen, where he learned that many of the volunteers had once been on the receiving end of the food line. They understood the importance of looking people in the eye, of offering coffee with dignity, of remembering names. "We're a community," explained Dora, the kitchen's coordinator. "Today you need help, tomorrow you give help. That's how we survive." Robert began volunteering during breakfast service, wiping tables and sweeping floors. The work gave him purpose and a place to belong. For a few hours each day, he wasn't just receiving, he was contributing. On Saturday morning, a well-dressed couple arrived at the kitchen with trays of fresh donuts from an expensive bakery. They distributed the treats with big smiles, took a few photos for their social media, and left 15 minutes later, clearly pleased with themselves. "They mean well," Dora said, noticing Robert's expression, "but they don't stay long enough to learn anyone's name." That afternoon, a street artist named Ray invited Robert to sit with him while he sketched portraits for tourists. Ray shared his earnings, buying them both hot dogs from a street vendor. "Been where you are," Ray said. 6 years ago, sleeping under bridges. Someone helped me get my meds straight, gave me art supplies. Now I pay it forward when I can." As his second week on the streets ended, Robert sat in the library writing in his notebook. "I came looking for hardship, expecting to witness suffering. I found plenty of both, but I never expected to find such kindness, such generosity from those with so little. Gloria gives away food she needs herself. Luis shares his time despite his own troubles. A child offered his scarf without hesitation. These gifts mean more because they come at real cost to the giver. I've donated millions, but never felt the weight of giving like these people do. They don't give from excess, they give from their necessity, and somehow they find joy in it." The beginning of week 3 brought colder weather. A sharp wind cut through Robert's jacket as he walked from the shelter to the day center. His disguise was no longer just makeup. His face had grown thinner, his hands rougher, and a real beard now covered his cheeks. When he caught his reflection in store windows, he barely recognized himself. That Tuesday morning, Robert was helping serve breakfast at Hope Kitchen when he noticed a young woman trying to feed 2 small children. The little ones, maybe 4 and 6 years old, sat quietly at the table, their eyes too serious for children so young. The mother looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hands shaking slightly as she cut a pancake into tiny pieces. "First time here?" Robert asked, offering her a cup of coffee. She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "I'm Diane," she said quietly. "These are my kids, Pete and Amy." Throughout breakfast, Robert kept an eye on the family. The children ate everything on their plates, carefully, without complaint. Diane barely touched her food, pushing most of it onto her children's plates when she thought no one was looking. Later, as he was wiping down tables, Diane approached him. "Do you know of any places that are hiring?" she asked. "I've tried everywhere, but no one wants to hire someone with no permanent address, and I can't get a permanent address without a job." Robert recognized the terrible cycle: no job without an address, no address without a job. "What kind of work do you do?" he asked. "I was a home health aide," she said. "But then my car broke down and I couldn't get to my clients' homes. Things fell apart pretty fast after that." She explained they'd been staying with her sister, but her sister's landlord had found out and threatened to evict them all if Diane and her children didn't leave. "We've been sleeping in the park for 2 nights," she said, her voice breaking. "I told the kids it's like camping, but they're so cold. I don't know what to do anymore." Robert felt something twist inside him. In his real life, he could have solved Diane's problems with a phone call and barely noticed the money spent. As Rob, he had no such power. "There's a family shelter on Oak Street," he suggested. "Someone told me they sometimes have space." Hope flickered in Diane's eyes. "Thank you," she said. "We'll try there." That afternoon, heavy rain started falling. Robert huddled in the library, thinking about Diane and her children out in the downpour. At closing time, he found himself walking toward Oak Street, wondering if the family had found shelter. What he saw made him stop cold. Diane stood outside an apartment building, clutching her children's hands, while a large man tossed garbage bags of their belongings onto the wet sidewalk. Another man stood nearby, arms crossed, watching impassively. "Please," Diane was saying, "just give us until tomorrow." The shelter said they might have space then. "Not my problem," the first man said. "Boss says clear out apartment 12, so that's what I'm doing. You ain't paid rent in 2 months." Robert stepped forward without thinking. "What's going on here?" The man turned, sizing him up and dismissing him in one glance. "Mind your own business, buddy." "They need a place to stay," Robert said. "It's pouring rain." "There are children here." "Look at you," the man laughed. "What are you going to do about it? You can barely take care of yourself." Something in Robert snapped. For nearly 3 weeks, he'd been treated as less than human, invisible, or unwanted. Now, watching these children clutching their mother's hands in the rain, he couldn't stay silent. "I know people," Robert said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "People who can help." The man stepped closer, threateningly. "Yeah, where are these people now?" Robert stood his ground. "I'm calling them right now." He pulled out his emergency phone, the one he'd kept hidden for 3 weeks. "Rob, don't," Diane said. "It's not worth getting hurt over." But Robert was already dialing. When the second man grabbed his arm, Robert shoved back, surprising himself with his anger. The phone clattered to the sidewalk. Someone shoved him hard, and Robert fell, scraping his hands on the concrete. Little Emmy started crying. Pete stood in front of his mother, tiny fists clenched, trying to be brave. The sight of the boy, ready to fight grown men to protect his mother, made Robert's decision easy. That night, in the privacy of a gas station bathroom, he used his emergency phone to call his assistant. "I need you to pay someone's rent," he said when she answered in shock. 2 months back rent plus 6 months forward. Apartment 12 in the building at 1430 Oak Street. The tenant's name is Diane Carroll. Do it anonymously from one of the foundation accounts. "Robert, is that you? Where have you been?" his assistant asked. "I'm fine," he said. "Just do this for me today and arrange a job interview for her at the hospital. Home health aide position." "But—" "No questions," Robert interrupted. "Please, I'm safe, I promise. I'll explain everything when I get back." He ended the call before she could ask more questions. That night, Robert lay awake on his shelter cot. He'd broken his own rules by intervening. The experiment was compromised. But watching the relief on Diane's face when the building manager received confirmation of payment, that felt more important than any rule. In his notebook he wrote, "Some problems can't wait for perfect solutions. Some suffering shouldn't be observed when it can be stopped. I came to learn, but today I had to act. What good is understanding if it doesn't lead to change?" After helping Diane and her children, Robert knew his time living on the streets was coming to an end. He had learned more than he ever expected, felt more than he thought possible, and now had decisions to make. But first, he owed the truth to the people who had shared their lives and struggles with him. Robert spent his final weekend on the streets visiting the places that had become part of his daily routine. He helped serve breakfast at Hope Kitchen, spent the afternoon at the library, and shared his dinner with Gloria on her usual park bench. He was saying goodbye, though no one else knew it yet. On Sunday evening, he asked Tom, Louis, Gloria, and Ray to meet him in the small park after dinner. Dora from the kitchen joined them too. They sat in a circle on benches, curious about the meeting. "I need to tell you all something," Robert began, his voice unsteady. "I haven't been honest about who I am." Gloria reached over and patted his hand. "We all have secrets, dear. No need to explain." "This is different," Robert said. He took a deep breath. "My name isn't Rob. It's Robert Kincaid." There was a moment of silence. Then Louis laughed. "The tech guy? The billionaire? Good one." Robert shook his head. "Not a billionaire, but yes, that Robert Kincaid." He explained everything, his growing dissatisfaction with his life, his decision to understand homelessness firsthand, the makeup and disguise, his 3 weeks living on the streets. As he spoke, their expressions changed from confusion to disbelief to something harder to read. Tom stood up and walked a few steps away, his back turned. Gloria's hand moved away from Robert's. "So this was what? A game to you?" Louis asked, his voice tight. "Some kind of rich guy's adventure?" "No," Robert said quickly. "I wanted to understand. Really understand. Not just read statistics or donate money, but know what it's actually like." "Now you know," Ray said flatly. "Congratulations. Great story for your next dinner party." The anger hurt more than Robert had expected. These people had become his friends. Their rejection felt like a physical pain. "I didn't mean to trick you," he tried again. You just wanted to play homeless for a while?" Tom interrupted, turning back to face the group. "Must be nice to have that choice." Robert couldn't argue. Tom was right. He had always had the choice to leave, to go back to his comfortable life. The others didn't. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I should have been honest." Dora, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "What will you do with what you learned? That's the real question." Robert explained his ideas, creating better shelters, funding job programs with built-in housing, investing in mental health services. As he talked, his words came faster, filled with the passion of his experiences. "Sounds like the same old charity model to me," Tom said when Robert finished. "Drop some money from above, feel good about yourself, forget about us." "That's not what I want," Robert insisted. "Then what do you want?" Gloria asked, her eyes searching his face. "I want to make real change, lasting change. I have resources that could help, but I don't want to waste them on things that don't work. That's why I came to live here, to learn what's needed, not what I think is needed." There was another silence, less hostile this time. Ray scratched his beard thoughtfully. "You didn't have to come back and tell us the truth," he said finally. "Could have just disappeared." Robert shook his head. "You deserve to know, and I need your help to do this right." Louis laughed without humor. "Now the millionaire needs our help. That's rich. Literally." But Tom stepped forward, arms crossed, studying Robert's face. "You want advice? Here's mine. Don't just throw money at problems you now understand. Walk with us as yourself. That's harder than pretending to be one of us." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "I mean stop hiding," Tom said. "Use your name, your influence, your face. Stand with people like us publicly. That takes real courage, more than sleeping in a shelter for a few weeks." "He's right," Dora nodded. "Money helps, but visibility matters more. People listen to men like you. They ignore people like us." Robert thought about this. He'd been planning to return to his life, work quietly through his foundation. But they were asking for something different, something harder. "You can disappear back to your penthouse," Gloria said gently. "Or you can stay connected. Not by pretending to be homeless, but by being a bridge between our worlds." The conversation continued late into the evening. Some, like Louis, remained skeptical. Others, like Gloria, were willing to cautiously believe in Robert's intentions. By the end, no neat resolution had been reached, just a complicated, messy understanding that matched the complicated, messy reality of homelessness itself. As they parted ways, Robert asked, "Will you help me get this right? Be advisors, partners in whatever comes next?" Ray shrugged. "Talk is cheap. Let's see what you actually do." But Tom held out his hand, rough and calloused against Robert's. "Show up next week as yourself, the real Robert Kincaid. Then we'll talk." Walking away from the park that night, Robert felt lighter despite the uncertainty ahead. The truth had cost him something, easy friendship, simple trust, but had given him something more valuable. a genuine challenge to do better than he had originally planned. 2 months passed since Robert had revealed his true identity. The first Monday after his confession, he had shown up at Hope Kitchen wearing pressed khaki pants and a blue button-down shirt. No disguise, no worn-out clothes, just Robert Kincaid, looking like the wealthy businessman he was. The regular volunteers had stayed in shock. The kitchen supervisor nearly dropped a tray of bread. But Tom had nodded slightly, acknowledging that Robert had passed his first test, showing up as himself. That day was awkward, with whispers following Robert as he washed dishes and mopped floors. But he kept coming back, week after week, doing the unglamorous work without complaint. Not as a boss, not as a savior, just as another pair of hands. "Didn't think you'd stick with it," Louise admitted after the 4th week. "Figured you write a big check and disappear." Robert had written checks, many of them, but he hadn't disappeared. Instead, he'd listened, really listened, and what he heard changed everything about his approach. Now, on a bright spring morning, Robert stood with Tom, Gloria, Ray, Dora, and Louise outside an old warehouse. Workers were unloading furniture from trucks while painters finished touching up the entrance. "What do you think?" Robert asked, genuinely nervous about their opinions. "Let's see inside before we decide," Tom said, always the most cautious of the group. The Kincaid Community Initiative wasn't a typical shelter or soup kitchen. The first floor held small studio apartments, 30 of them, each with a private bathroom and kitchenette. The rent was set at 20% of whatever income the resident earned, even if that meant just a few dollars a month. "Housing first," Robert explained as they toured the building. "That's what you all kept telling me. People need an address, privacy, and dignity before they can solve other problems." The second floor held a medical clinic with a full-time doctor and nurse, plus visiting specialists twice a week. There was a mental health center with counselors and a psychiatrist. And most importantly, there was a job training center with computers, classrooms, and staff to help with resumes and interviews. "The companies in my network have committed to hiring people who complete the training programs," Robert explained. "Real jobs with benefits, not just minimum wage positions." Gloria ran her hand along a wall, feeling the fresh paint. "It's beautiful," she said, "but buildings aren't enough. The people running it matter most." Robert nodded. "That's why I'm not running it. You are." He explained that he had created a paid board of directors, people who had experienced homelessness themselves. Tom, Gloria, and Dora had already agreed to serve. They would make the policies, hire the staff, and oversee the programs. "We need your perspective," Robert said. "I'm just the funding source." Ray laughed. "Just the guy writing million-dollar checks, huh?" But there was approval in his voice. Ray had agreed to teach art classes at the center, giving others the creative outlet that had helped him survive his darkest days. Louise remained skeptical. "So what happens when you get bored and move on to the next project?" Robert explained the endowment he had created, money set aside that would fund the center's operations for at least 20 years. "This isn't just my project," he said. "It belongs to all of us." Later that evening, after the others had left, Robert and Tom sat on a bench outside the new building. The sky was turning pink with sunset, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. "You know," Tom said, breaking a comfortable silence, "when you first told us who you really were, I was ready to write you off as another rich guy playing poor." Robert nodded. "I don't blame you, but you listened," Tom continued. "Most people with money think they already have all the answers. You actually heard what we said. Not everything had gone smoothly. There had been arguments about policies, disagreements about priorities. The board meetings could get heated, but that was the point. Real collaboration meant real conflict sometimes. The first residents would move in next week. Diane and her children would be among them. She had completed a refresher course for home health aides and already had a job lined up at the local hospital. "Will it work?" Robert asked, watching the sunset. "Will this actually help?" Tom shrugged. "Some of it will. Some won't. We'll figure out what works and change what doesn't. That's the difference. We'll be making those decisions together." Every Friday afternoon, Robert still volunteered at Hope Kitchen, wearing an apron and serving food like anyone else. Some people recognized him now, but most just saw another volunteer. He preferred it that way. The biggest change, though, was in Robert himself. The emptiness that had plagued him before his experiment was gone. In its place was something better, not the simple satisfaction of charity, but the complex fulfillment of genuine connection. You know what's funny? Robert said as he and Tom walked toward the bus stop. I thought I was going undercover to learn about homeless people, but really I learned about myself. Tom laughed. That's usually how it works. You find yourself by seeing through someone else's eyes. Robert had spent millions on the Kincaid Community Initiative, but his most valuable contribution wasn't money. It was showing up, week after week, not as a disguised observer or a distant donor, but as himself, with his sleeves rolled up, ready to work alongside the people he once thought he needed to save. See you Friday, Tom asked as his bus approached. I'll be there, Robert promised, and he meant it.